Everybody, and welcome to the Payments Leaders Show, where today we've got an interesting change of tables, and the mic is going to be turned on me today. So I'm slightly nervous, but absolutely delighted because our host today, we're in very good hands, is Keith Douglas. So Keith, thanks for taking the time out of your very busy schedule.
No, my pleasure, Adrian. It's great to have the tables turned on you and have the opportunity to ask you some questions, not only from my point of view, but indeed some of those that you've worked with, or indeed you have interviewed on the Payment Leaders podcast, have posed a number of questions they would like me on their behalf to ask you. So thank you very much for giving your time over to do this. And a special call out to Maria, who was your guest on the Payment Leaders podcast and video on episode 12, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
Who was the original genesis of this idea of interviewing you. So thank you, Maria. And I hope you and the rest of Adrian's followers enjoy our conversation.
Wonderful.
So let me start with the first question then, Adrian.
Okay.
And I've been fortunate to get to know you over the last 3-4 years. And one of the things that struck me when I first met you was when you talked to me about aspects of your career vision, and one aspect of that in particular, which I'd love you to share with this group and give us an explanation to why that's so important and the values that underpin that vision.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. So my vision is to positively impact 20,000 careers whilst I'm alive on this planet. The reason for that, if I impact 20,000 careers, I'll impact more than 20,000 children, and their families will impact. This goes back to when I was age 10. Unfortunately, my dad had a stroke. He was age 50 then, and that significantly impacted our lives very negatively. Yep. You can imagine from an income perspective, from, well, just every aspect of possibilities or lack of possibilities that were then given. And unfortunately, my dad never worked again in his life. So that was sort of head baked into an upbringing. But what happened during that time was my mum came forward, got multiple jobs, and just made sure we got obviously looked after. I got educated, all the sort of things. So my mum's always been, I sort of always held a huge candle to my mum in that time. If you fast forward though 2 decades, and then as a headhunter, particularly working in London, I learned a set of skills that could future-proof any career. So what that meant was that I had quite a large team. So I was hunting for jobs all the time for people, for them to fulfill. And that was a skill set that if you bring that you can manage your career effectively. So basically, my passion and my purpose combines both my passion and my skill set and solves a perennial problem. If you look at my values have been very clearly shaped by my parents. My dad was really strong, traditional gentleman who integrity meant everything. So he always said, be careful of what you commit to, but if you commit to it, you do it. And your life just wasn't worth leading in our family. If you said you're going to do something for someone else outside of the family or inside the family, then you had to do it. It was just your so. And then my mum taught me, or she gave me unconditional love. She also showed the value of caring for others with her clients and how she looked after them. And whatever time of night it was, she would look after people to make sure they were well. And she also told me a truism though, which was I learned very early on in my life the value of learning and continuing to learn. Also, hard work and being part of a supportive community can have dramatically positive, changing impacts on people's lives, because they certainly did for me. The final part I'll just share is my code. So I've got a sort of, what underpins that is my sort of code of sort of 5 or 6 things that are really important. So I believe that all humans have significant human potential. Character and values succeed over natural talent over the course of a lifetime. And to quote a fellow Irishman of yours is Paul O'Connell, who I admire so much, who basically said, let's be the best at everything that requires no talent. So I'm not saying I haven't got any talent. I'm not saying people haven't, but whatever talent you do have, whilst we're alive, let's optimize it. And our mindset is going to be the dictating factor of what we do moving forward. So just the 3 final ones here for my code. All cognitive complex tasks are learnable, and which is most of us are doing complex work. We're not just trying to run 100-meter sprints really quickly. Next one, to discover our true authentic selves, we do need to do the hard reflective practice. There's no shortcuts. I haven't seen anybody being able to do that. And as a coach myself, it took me a long time to get to my true authentic self. And finally, my role whilst on this planet is to unlock the potential within my fellow humans.
Fantastic. That is a very powerful code. Glad that you managed to take inspiration from the greatest Irish rugby players of all time, Paul O'Connell. It's pity he was from Munster, not Leinster, but there you go.
Can't get it all right,
that.
Can't get it all right.
Thanks for that. Maybe if I could kind of lead from, what it is you do today. And you're a man of many talents, but first and foremost, you're an executive coach. And I'd be, welcome your thoughts and your views on the necessary ingredients for an impactful executive coaching relationship. In your experience, what are those ingredients?
Okay. Perhaps if I could just take a little step back at just how I became an exec coach in the first place. So whilst I was a headhunter and manager of teams, my favorite days, though, were when I was either recruiting and showing new recruits how to become recruiters and the training element. But also then my other one was when I released somebody for help them from a bullying situation in the workplace. And that wasn't your normal day job. And I sort of always felt, if I'm absolutely honest, I felt a bit of a fish out of water. There were people who were far better than me, who were born to recruit, who were very good at it. I love the people aspect of it. I love the leadership aspect. But executive coaching for me enables me to fulfill my purpose, but it also allows me to sleep at night. Because if I do that and I fulfill my purpose every day, it means I can get up in the morning with a clear direction, but also if I've helped somebody that day, I can go to sleep at night. But in terms of, you mentioned there, to answer specifically a question about relationship, I do think that's the whole point. For me, as an executive coach, you have the privileged position of helping somebody, sometimes in difficult circumstances, often with very high potential individuals, to reach their potential. And it's a partnership. For me as an executive coach, it's whoever I'm working with has already got the ability. It's within them. My role is to build the conditions and the environment and the trust so that we can unlock that as effectively as possible, just like any good leader, So for me, it's about trust. It's about having a clear purpose. It's about mutual respect. But ultimately, it's about a partnership. So I will refer to one of my longest standing clients. I won't mention their name, but I asked him recently, what's the impact that our relationship has had on him? And he said, there's 4 aspects to that. And I'm really proud of number 1, which is our partnership has allowed him to show up fully as himself as an authentic leader, which wasn't always the case. Another one that's really important as well, holistically looking this, it's enhanced his well-being. This person does walk around generally in life with a smile on his face, not most days, pretty much every day. And then the next one, then this is about, this is important, but we tripled his income in the time that we work together. And I do have skill sets as a headhunter. You negotiate 5-6 times a day at least. This is not a learned skill, it's something that you have, or you learn and you develop. But this one's really important for me, is by showing him how to coach people, he's impacted thousands of people's lives positively. And I do recall one particular situation where he went way out of his way during a reorganization. And he said, anybody exiting the business, I'm going to coach. I'm going to coach and I'm going to get them and help them as much as I can to get their next roles. That had a dramatic multiplying effect all across the world. So for me, I think that butterfly effect is what enables that to actually continue from an impact perspective of a coaching relationship.
Wow. Thank you. And great, great to hear how you as an executive coach have impacted that individual's career trajectory. I too have been a beneficiary of executive coaching, and I know how valuable it is. I know how important the relationship with your coach is in order to achieve those goals. So thanks for sharing that. When we talked earlier, you talked about your mum and one of the values that she instilled in you around learning and hard work. So my next question is something that relates to that from Adam Grant, who talked about the importance of learning something from each person you meet. So as an executive coach, you engage with many payment leaders. What are the kind of, it's an unfair question, but I'll ask on the same. What are the top three things you've learned from those many interactions you've had with payment leaders?
Yeah, it's not like you to ask me an unfair question, Keith. Well, I think, first of all, if we can look at the payments ecosystem, I think the truth is you can't do anything of significance in the payments ecosystem on your own. Even if you are a very, very large company, given the nature of the things like the four-party model, payments. So the first thing for me is you have to be collaborative. It's the vital skill for success, because one day you could be talking to somebody who is a competitor, the very next day you're partners, and then a third day you're a supplier to them, and that goes around a bit. So what that really means for me is you need, as a leader, to have the mental and emotional dexterity to be able to play those various roles throughout the ecosystem. You also need the mental and emotional dexterity with your teams to stand up. And it does take that. You can't play an arrogant big play, even if you're a huge vendor, because there's always somebody bigger, there's always somebody more important, and there's always a vital cog that's missing from that place. So I think that's the first one. Sorry, we're going to say anything, Nicky?
No, keep going.
I think the next thing, as the leader, the best leaders I see, they embrace the opportunities before the challenges, because we've never been in a space like this in the payments industry. It's so exciting, it's so full of opportunity, and it's frankly so headline. I think the pandemic has only exaggerated that. So, but if we embrace only the challenges, we're unlikely to realize the opportunities as much. And then the third one, there are many, but these are the most important, I think, is always seeking at least 4 wins. So if you're a leader in the payments industry, if you can, and most people do this, and I've never seen this so collaborative, you probably want the industry to win first. Then you want your company to win. Then you want your team to win. You probably want your line manager to win. And then eventually you can win. So I can't count. There you go. That's 5. But I love the example with MasterCard, previously with Adrian, where he was saying, look, what we want to do with decency quotient, we want all boats to rise. Yep. And I think the impact the payments industry can have on the unbanked, on the underbanked, on the undereducated when it comes financially, it's dramatic. It's dramatic. And yes, we've got shareholders to look after, etc. But there's no reason why we can't pursue 4 or 5 wins at the same time.
Oh, great, great perspective. Thank you, and certainly those important kind of lessons in leadership that you have gleaned over the years certainly resonate. I've not quite thought about your last one there in the context of framing wins through 4, or should I say 5 lenses, given what you've just said. So thanks for that. One of the things that I have the pleasure of working with you and some teams that I've led in the organizations I've worked for, and one of the things you've always helped me and my team think about is human-centered leadership. So again, I'd welcome, as I'm sure the audience, your thoughts on human-centered leadership. What does that mean? What does that look like? What's at the heart of that, as you see it, as you've experienced it, as you've helped others?
Sure.
Try to be that type of leader.
Okay. Well, can I say what it's not, first of all? Yep. and I'll quote Ajay again, banger on this, because obviously we know what a great source of wisdom and knowledge he is. It's not about being nice. Okay, mind you, there's not a problem being nice, but it's not just about being nice. Yeah, actually, human-centric leadership is actually a very pragmatic way of getting things done. And the way I always look at human-centric leadership is just this on a continuum. On the left-hand side here, sorry, I'm looking at my left here, you have task-only orientated. Yeah. And on the right-hand side here, we have achieving task via human interactions effectively. Yeah. And the truth is, with shareholders, with projects, with things, we always have lots of tasks to do. But for me, the attributes of a human-centered leader are fully cognizant of their responsibilities and their tasks they have to do. And by the way, they tend to focus on the most important ones, not drink from the fire hose and just say, I must do the following. And we'll come on to that hopefully later. But seeing beyond task, I think, is the first thing. So caring for their people and giving them access, but also then, having their back. There's nothing more empowering, and I've experienced this when I took over businesses that were ailing, and I had people who gave me air cover. They said, you're going to need to sort out this division. You're going to need 6 to 9 months, etc. We're going to give you the air cover. We're not expecting results in 6 to 9 weeks, thankfully. But also put them in the right roles, which are a sort of 80% fit, but an appropriate level of stretch. But you have to give people access. I was only talking to one leader yesterday, and he said to me, I don't have half an hour catch up with my team. Well, one of them is a good example. We have 9 5-minute catch ups per 2 weeks. And he said, but they're so much more powerful. But I will be there because I know when they do need to speak to me, it is important. Secondly, for me, you've got to believe in people. It's rocket fuel. I've experienced this as a child myself, and also I've been lucky enough to have many people who believe in me. And that means you've got a chance to reach potential. And it's something I've always admired about you as well, Keith, where you see an opportunity that's hidden within somebody, and then you give them the platform to be able to do that. I think then the final part is to challenge them, having created that safe environment and belief, but challenge them and then hold them to high standards. This is not, there's 2 elements to this always. It comes with a level of accountability as well. But they're the most important things that I've seen the best human-centered leaders do.
Fantastic. No, I a lot of that, a lot of what you said kind of resonates with me, and I too like a quote, and Simon Sinek is one of my favorites. When he talked about leadership, but particularly from a kind of a human-centered leadership perspective, that leading is not about being in charge, but taking care of those in your charge. And I think that lens, that approach, I do think helps you be a more human-centered leader. Now, again, another question from one of your listeners, and indeed people that you know, who has heard you say on a number of occasions, this is not unique to you, but has heard you say culture eats strategy for breakfast on multiple occasions. So I guess, again, as an executive coach, you witnessed how leaders try to define and shape culture or an operating culture. What has your advice been to those leaders on the subject of culture and building culture?
Yeah. This I feel is my sort of facilitation aspect, but it's the work I've always called in to do, because I always feel very privileged to be any of those rooms I'm in, because it's full of super talented people. Usually, I would say far higher IQs than I would ever have, but usually somewhere the operating model or the operating rhythm and the culture is the thing we're looking at. First of all, for me, I always look at culture a bit like trying to hold the wind in your hands. Yeah, which is, and we've all experienced it. There's certain moments when we've got a team that's just aligned, it's just gone in the right direction, and everything's just flowing. We're in flow. We've seen it in sport, we've seen it in various other things. But the truth is, we can't hold our hands forever. And then there's a dynamic, there's a change, and it changes. So for me, it's realizing it's a moving thing and it requires effort. I've never seen a culture that just sort of happens with no effort. Yep, it might look like, but just like any great performance. So creating a space where you empower and you have a collaborative space, I think, is most important. but it's so easily lost then by leaders eroding trust. And I've seen this so often where a leaders think, actually, do you know what? We've got this culture thing nailed. We really have. I've experienced it myself. And then they start making assumptions. And then, I think the big one for me at the moment is what people are doing with coming back to work full time. Yeah.
Yeah.
The mandating of that is fraught with danger because you're saying we don't trust you. And creating a sense of belonging and those sort of things. There are ways of doing this, but you tell people and show them you don't trust them, then your culture is going to be eroded. So, but I think culture starts with the leader. So knowing yourself first, what you stand for, and frankly, what you stand against, I think is really important. You have to engage your leadership team, your exec team. It's their culture to live, to breathe, to take to their teams. So I think you have to frame it, and then let them decide what the operating model looks like and how they want to hold each other to account. Because when things are going great, culture's not a problem. Yep. It's when things don't work out and there's a problem, it's what do we do then? I call it MOTs, in a moment of truth. So, and also as a leader, how are you going to choose to lead authentically? And how will you call out poor behavior from your peers and above? Because if you look at there's numerous examples on governance, on poor behavior across from sporting bodies to lobbying bodies to all sorts of people at the moment, that to me is a cumulative effect of senior people and not so senior people speaking up in the moment or not speaking up in the moment. So culture starts with the leader, but ultimately it's created by the team.
Great. I'm writing myself a little note here. I like that. Starts with the leader, but created by the team. Super. I guess, as an individual who's worked in this industry some time, helping and supporting leaders, one of the things that I think we've all experienced, but certainly had to cope more with in the workplace is burnout, particularly given the pandemic and the impact that has had on people and indeed, frankly, workplace culture. Again, something you referenced in one of your earlier questions about return to the office, return to work. So, again, I'd love for you to share some of your thoughts on how you've helped, without naming anyone, but how you've helped leaders manage individual and or team burnout. What are some of the tips, advice you've shared with them to help them manage it or overcome it?
Sure. This is a prevalent problem. This is perennial. There's no two ways about it, and it's quite often hidden because senior leaders, don't want to show too much vulnerability, and it can be pretty lonely at the top. And having other people, I quite often find that actually as an executive coach, first 10 minutes, a lot of my I just get this download from people because they know it's a safe space and they just go, boom, this is what's happening in my world. We don't even look at what we're starting to look at. Just to understand a bit of context here, I think the important thing is in the corporate world and also the VC funded world, etc. There is a big monster there that's insatiable. Okay. It's never going to be content with what you feed it. I first learned this by being significantly over target myself once on the last day of the quarter, still being demanded for more because another part of the business had let somebody down. And I was like, it deflated me significantly. I just still took my team to the pub, by the way. I didn't want to get that in the way of us having a good time. But I think you need to realize the context that if that monster is insatiable, what are you as the leader going to do about that? Because if you just let that happen, come down to you, and you just push that then down to your team, you're causing yourself stress and you take. So I really do believe in the power of no. And one of the best examples I heard many years ago with a rapidly growing technology company, these sort of senior leaders reporting to the CEO who was changing the business, reorgs, they got new funding, etc. And they used to say to him, they had a Monday morning stand-up as to what the rhythm of the business was going to be that week.
Right.
And they came up with this really great way of managing the CEO. They basically say to him, so he'd come up with this huge list like this, and which were all important, by the way. All of these were valid and important. There was no trivia on there at all. And they said to him, out of all of those important tasks, what is most important? Because it's 120% of our capacity you've just described. So what's most important that we can have most impact on with the 100% of the time and energy us and our teams have? Now, the CEO certainly didn't like this to start with. This was not an easy conversation. But over time, he realized we were going to focus on prioritization. We were going to 80-20 things. And this team eventually became needle shifters in terms of where the business was. But they took ownership of saying what's most important and not just taking it down. So I think that's one for me. Skillfully managing our energy. I think time is overrated. I read a book many years ago. It's called On Form. Here it is. Here's my copy. You see, I've scrawled all over it. This places an emphasis on managing energy more than our time. As human beings, we've got 4 energy systems: our physical, our emotional, our mental, and our spiritual stroke purpose. That's it. That's all we've got. If we skillfully manage our physical time, the quantity of energy we have, if we get emotionally engaged on tasks that mean something to us, if we get mentally focused and not distracted, and we're purposeful, and we take the time out to find out what we're purposeful about, skillfully manage that. I first learned this when I wrote my book. I thought the best way to write a book was the way I'd always been done, which is frankly, industrial. I'll start at 9 o'clock in the morning and I'll finish writing it at 8 o'clock at night. Yeah. What I realized by reading this book was if I did it in 90-minute sprints, 3 90-minute sprints with short 15 minutes in between, I got 3 times the amount actually written for less than half the time input. So a simple input versus output, it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. And we're not working in the industrial age anymore. Yeah. So then I would also say then about going back to my point about the leader, that the leader needs to understand whom they are and what they are, what's negotiable in their life, what's non-negotiable, and have a purpose and stick to it. But you have to lead and you have to over-communicate to your team. I think leadership is about over-communication. Yeah, it's the leader's job. Where does leadership go wrong? It goes wrong when people don't feel involved. So the other things practically that have happened is obviously get close to and stay close to your team. And because it'll show the direction of how you lead, which will have a multiplier effect. And by the way, there are times people all go through difficult situations. And you've got to make it safe for somebody to say, look, this is happening in my life. There's something happening with my wife, my children. There's something happening with my health. Actually, there's something happening I'm really stuck with. And if you do that, do you know what? You can actually grow together even more. And I would go back to that final piece, which is, don't just lead with task. And I know a wonderful example here of somebody of a particular team that was being very, very driven to achieve a tight deadline by a particular day. But this particular leader, who I consider to be one of the most human-centric leaders I've ever come across, they took the time out to say, why are we doing this project? Why is it important? Why is it important to the team? And there was a beautiful moment in the team where somebody shared a very personal story about why developing and helping customers really mattered. Yeah. That team completed that task in something like 30% less than before, because collectively they harnessed their why. To me, sorry, I get goosebumps when I listen to that story. That was going slower, but it was better for the business. Customers were better. People were more engaged. Everyone was winning. Everyone was winning. Who was losing in that situation?
Fantastic. Actually, I just want to pick up a question from something you said just now around, when you're engaging with the client, the first 10 minutes, they're kind of downloading, what's in their head or the issues that are troubling them, or, meeting they've just come from, whatever it may be. And obviously, you know, I suspect more often than not, they may be in a degree of an emotional state as they're downloading with you. So how do you deal, or indeed, not you, help others deal with their emotions when things aren't going the way you or they would like them to? What's your advice to them?
Okay.
Or to yourself in that case, if you want to reference yourself in this?
Well, I'll start here by not pointing the finger, but I learned this many years ago from my non-exec chairman, who had done a phenomenal job of having the fastest growing accountancy practice in the UK during the 90s. But he was, you know, I was very lucky. I met him in his 60s, and he'd already been very successful. And whenever I went to him with a problem, he'd always ask me the same question.
Yeah.
And he'd always say, so if we step forward, what would be a good outcome from this situation? And he said this to me, and in the end, I thought, well, I'm not that dumb. He keeps on asking me the same thing. I could probably ask myself. And then I came up with, and I read something once, which is an equation I use consistently with my with teams I work with, and also with people, which is E plus R equals O. Event plus response equals outcome. Event could be an external event from, I don't know, we're having a recession, we're going into a pandemic, we haven't hit our numbers, all sorts of things. And an E is a uncontrollable and uncontrollable event, which happens to many people consistently. However, our response is ultimately, we are 100% responsible for the responses we give to any situation. So number one, I've learned, never react. Never react. You know, if we might be on the plains of Africa fighting with lions, if we're just going to react to things. We've got a prefrontal cortex, which allows us an executive function. So there's no need to react to any situation. But have multiple responses. So if you have multiple responses, you don't need to have 7, but having 2 or 3 responses to situations, and many of these come up, because that will directly impact the outcome. Yeah. So skillful communicators here, even when this happen, when we're usually under attack of some description or perceived attack, and we can react and just respond and go, yeah, but you said this and I said that. Whereas if we skillfully go, okay, if we enter that other person's world, if we understand what their value set is, if we understand what emotional state they're in at a particular time, we're going to respond more skillfully. And look, this happens a lot with my clients. And the ultimate for me is a night's sleep. So you can get, you know, and again, email, somebody could be doing some, not that this happens a lot, honest, but, you know, somebody possibly from somewhere else, the other side of the pond, has got an email and sent it to you and is going to give you both barrels. First of all, it's your choice to respond when you respond and on what terms you respond. And there's nothing like a good night's sleep. So quite often I will say to people, however you're feeling now, get it down on paper. Or, you know, you can go all guns blazing, but please leave it in your draft. Okay. Do not send it. Have a night's sleep tomorrow, and then tomorrow revisit it. Well, I know for a fact that when sleep is the most fundamental, apart from drinking water, is the most fundamental thing apart from being to be alive, is if that response is still the same 24 hours later, okay, then send it. Usually it's not. The emotional level will always have come down. We'll have taken a wider context. We'll have asked ourselves, for what purpose? So I think that one for me is really fundamental, but it always comes back down to taking a bit of context, which is, you know, I'll be honest now, if I ever go into conflict situation with any of my clients, which luckily happens very rarely, there's one question I've learned to ask myself is, what will be the impact on the relationship of what I'm about to do next? And then with my deepest clients, never mind, you know, they could be having a bad day or whatever it may be, I do just say 3 words: trust the relationship. And when you do that, you lift yourself out of whatever quagmire or detail or whatever else is going here. When you can say, trust the relationship, you're in a really strong place. Of course, you have to have built the relationship first. So that's my sort of 2 pennyworth on managing emotions effectively.
Fantastic. Right, final question.
Okay.
And this one is actually from me. I was once in a leadership session or meeting, and the individual who was presenting quoted a Scottish poet, a lady called Mary Oliver. And his challenge to us as a leadership team was a quote from that from one of her poems, which was, "What is it you want to do with this weird and wonderful life that you have? This one weird and wonderful life that you have." So you've obviously given us an insight to some of those things, be it your values or your vision. But let me leave you with that question. Given where you are today, looking forward,
Mm.
what is it you want to do? Your weird and wonderful life.
Well, thank you for a tricky one. I think first of all, I'd have to start with the end in mind. So I was very fortunate enough many years ago. Unfortunately, I had to do my have to do my mum's funeral tribute, and I was never able to do this exercise myself until I'd done hers, because then, but there's a real important piece there to honor somebody and had a wonderful lived life of, and the many people and the impact she'd had across people's lives. So if I step back to mine, without being too morbid about this, what would I want said about at my funeral tribute? And I genuinely believe that, for me, if it was, he was he was decent and a good son, husband, dad, and friend, who helped anybody he could within his means and fulfilled his purpose whilst alive to positively impact 20,000 careers. If that could happen, I think that's a life worth lived with the experiences I've had to help others.
What a fantastic way to end our interview. Thanks for sharing that. Let me. There were so many things you discussed. I'm going to try from my notes just pull out a few of those things. In no particular order, but at least a synopsis for your viewers and listeners. That's to positively impact 20,000 careers, recognizing that doing so will have a multiplier effect on those close to those individuals. Values around integrity, and for you that means when you commit to something, you must do it. Your certainly dad reinforced that with you. And caring from others, a value that your mother positively enshrined in you. Not only that, but the value of learning and indeed hard work. Thanks for sharing your codes, including things like character and value always win. All complex tasks are learnable, and to always try and discover the true and authentic self, or the true and authentic in others. What else can I talk about? The butterfly impact, the things that you've learned from leaders in payments. 3 things: being collaborative, embracing opportunity, and then facing into the challenge. And for me, what I liked is seeking the 4 wins.
Yeah.
That is for your industry, for your company, from your team, from your line manager, and then we'll add a 5th for the individual. We talked a little bit about, being fair, not nice, or frankly, decency is about being fair. It's not about being nice. The importance of challenge and holding to high standards. And I loved your response around culture, which is, the leader gets. It starts the leader, but obviously has to be created and owned by the wider team. What else did we talk about? You talked about the power of no. You talked about don't lead with the task. Harness energy in its many positive guises. And then as we kind of closed out, you talked about E plus R equals O, which I think is a great way to think about difficult situations and how you manage your emotions as you wrestle with making difficult or complex decisions. And I like the whole piece around keeping it draft until at least the next morning before you send, or indeed you open your mouth, wherever you choose to
simple.
To communicate. Listen, I think full of so many great perspectives, great advice, what you've learned, what you've tried to be. So thank you very much for sharing that with this audience, your audience, on your leadership podcast, your Pain Leadership podcast. So on behalf of everyone, thank you. I'll leave the final word to you before we close.
Well, Keith, I just want to say thank you for being a wonderful host. I knew how carefully you crafted the questions and how deliberately you listened and guided. So thank you for being a wonderful host.
That's great. Take care and stay tuned, guys, for the next episode, which shouldn't feature this very person you're looking at.